it's fueled by our support for actions that are not in keeping with a lot of the values you've been talking about, specifically in our support for the Israeli military, things like the assault on Gaza, when Arabs and Muslims see other Arabs and Muslims who are innocent civilians being attacked by a government and a military that we fund and support on a political and financial level. And I think, and I understand, there are many complicated international policy issues there. And I'm curious what the Obama administration's plan is and how much, I think I would say that there needs to be an addressing of our relationship with Israel and our support for their military actions as it relates to both our image and our integrity within the Arab and the Muslim world. And I'm curious what your government is doing about that.
Okay. And what your government is doing about that, too.
Yes, what our government is doing about that. And the second, and a smaller question is also, because you raised the issue of subjectivity in the implementation of profiling, what steps are in place to train our TSA workers in particular in terms of a better understanding of Arab and Muslim culture, so that they have something other than the fears and the stereotypes when they are implementing those policies?
Okay, 2 points there. You're absolutely right that our counterterrorism policies need to be integrated more fully into our foreign policies as a whole. I've used the term that our CT tail should not be wagging the policy dog, because if we're just addressing the terrorism threat, we're really missing how we can get to those factors and the environmental dynamics that are contributing to this. And the good examples are, look at the Horn of Africa right now in Somalia. We're facing a problem as far as Al-Qaeda in East Africa, and there are sort of raging violence there, internal civil war, Al-Shabaab and others. What are we hoping to be able to accomplish with the Horn to try to bring some peace and security to Somalia? Same thing in Yemen. We're facing a problem right now with Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, but Yemen has some significant structural problems. A depleted water table, oil revenues that are going down. They have the Houthi rebellion in the north, the Southern secessionists in the south, a unemployment rate that probably hovers about 40%. The fourth greatest population growth rate in the world at 3.5%. They double every 20 years. How are you going to address those problems? Because unless you address them, you're still going to have the extremists who are going to be the products of an environment that doesn't give them the opportunity they seek. So what we've tried to do, whether we're talking about Somalia or Yemen or other places, is to make... I'm coming to that. I said I have 2 points. That's the first one. Okay? So what we're trying to do is make sure that we're able to address the other issues that we need to be able to deal with successfully if we're going to make the long-term progress. We can take out terrorists, individuals, whatever, but it's like pollution. The pollutants get downstream and you start scooping them out. But unless you go upstream and start taking care of the actual polluters, you're not going to get ahead of it. So, second issue. First of all, the United States is dedicated to ensure that Israel stays safe and secure. It is a very close ally and partner of the United States, and we're going to make sure that that continues. At the same time, the President and others have underscored their commitment to make sure that there is going to be a two-state solution, and that the legitimate rights and aspirations of the Palestinian people need to be fulfilled. This is something that has vexed this government and the international community for the past 43 years now, ever since 1967, some might say before, in the late 40s. These are tough issues that the President has been trying with Senator Mitchell to continue to sort of work so that we right now have a divisive Palestinian populace between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, West Bank and Gaza. There needs to be some unity on both sides, both in the Israeli government as well as within the Palestinian area. And I think some people have the belief that we need to separate ourselves out from Israel before we can make progress in this. I don't agree with that. When I was, as I talked about being at AUC in the mid-'70s, it was in 75, it was less than 2 years after the 73 war, when the United States, came to Israel's rescue and pushed back then the Egyptian advance in the Sinai. And I remember very clearly walking down the street of Cairo one early morning. I used to just love walking through Cairo, the old city of the dead. And it was about, I think, 7 or 8 o'clock, and I could see an Egyptian, middle-aged Egyptian in traditional garb, in a galabeah, walking toward me, staring at me. And I'm looking at him, and he stops in front of me and says, "Enta Amriki al Sovieti?" Are you American or Soviet? Because the Soviet Union was the supporter of Egypt at the time. And although I wasn't well schooled in Middle Eastern politics, I knew that the United States was not the favored nation of a lot of folks who came to Israel's aid. And I was 19 years old at the time, and I didn't know what the right answer was in terms of being American or Soviet. And so I mustered my courage, and I said, "Ana Amriki?" And he looked at me with a big smile and put 2 thumbs up and said, "Mumtaz," and walked on. And I was left there scratching my head. And I went back to the dormitory and talked with some of my Egyptian and Jordanian and Palestinian dorm mates. And they said, "Well, see, John, you said you were an American, and America really stands for something. Yes, Arabs, Egyptians, Palestinians will have issue with United States foreign policy or U.S. government actions, but America does stand out in the Middle East, in the Arab world, and in the Islamic world as being this beacon of freedom and liberty." Remember back in the 70s when the Soviet Union was there, the United States was viewed as the bulwark against the encroachment of atheistic communism coming down. And we really did stand side to side to prevent that from happening. The United States, I think, represents a fairness that I think most Arabs and Muslims believe is innately in us, but sometimes our policies are misguided. We need to be able to address the issue of outstanding Israeli-Palestinian problems. You're absolutely right. It continues to feed this wellspring of anti-U.S. sentiment and extremism. There needs to be movement on both sides. We need to find a resolution, whether it be territorial, we're talking about the final status arrangements. It is tough, but we're not going to separate ourselves from Israel.
We are literally funding one side of that conflict. So it's not as simple as...
There's a lot of funding going on to the other side of the conflict as well in terms of the... yes, right here. Let's get a...
Thanks for taking my question. My name is Mandeep Savti, and I'm a guest of Sea Coalition. I agree with everything you've said today earlier on in your speech, and I'm like sitting here with a list of questions, and everything went out the window one at a time. But I still have a basic question for you. I have a 21-year-old son. Every time he passes through a airport security line, he's pulled aside and frisked. And this is a kid who's born and brought up in this country. And I feel it's just not his predicament. It's every 20, 18, 19, 20-year-old in this room feels the same way. Even though they're born and brought up in this country, and this is the only country they know, but they feel like they're disenfranchised every step of the way. They don't feel that in New York, but as soon as you walk away 500 miles west of New York, you start feeling that. My question to you, and as one question, somebody asked a question earlier on, what are you doing to engage the youth? Yes, I understand things like we are fighting the terrorists, but we have a much bigger problem at our hand. If we don't do something about this youth, who are American kids, and this is the only country they know, there's going to be a much bigger potential issue. Yes, you talked about Fort Hood gunmen, the person who killed 13 people. And America was very tolerant, and we are very appreciative of that. But I don't know how long they would stay that way. So my question to you is, and another thing that I took from you, that your father was an immigrant, just like I'm an immigrant, right? And your son of an immigrant, just like my son. What chances are for him to have the same rights as you enjoy today and going through all this climate that we are in right now?
Yeah. Oh, to have a magic wand and to wave it over this country and to allow us to be able to live without any of that prejudice or fear or profiling, and some of that prejudice is willful and malicious, and some of that prejudice is born out of ignorance, and it's not malicious. A couple things. One is that when I get together with President Obama every morning in the Oval Office, and he's sitting in that chair, and I used to be in the Oval Office a lot with previous presidents, and frequently I sit there and I look at an African American who has such a different background than any other president, who spent years in Indonesia, comes from a Kenyan father, American mother, represents that diversity in one person, who was able to not just aspire to, but actually achieve the highest office in this land.